getting this match underway. I'm pleased to say it's like the older we get, the better the footage is for some reason. I don't know why that is, but that's the way it's been so far. And I'm expecting now. You've got to remember, it is 10 years after the Lou Thesz Buddy Rogers match, which I think I got so much great positive feedback about. God, that was such a great match. Some of our listeners, Matt, even went back and watched it a second time with somebody else just to prove to their friend how good it was. So that must have been a real wrestling masterclass. But yeah, I'm expecting sort of almost. I mean, we're a decade removed. I think the focal point still at this point, Matt, even from early on, was very much wrestling. I think we were still at a time where wrestling was the forefront of everything. As we see Pat O'Connor just actually clumping one around the back of the head. Buddy Rogers there. I love something that you look at straight away. You look at their boots and their attire. It's just so very basic, isn't it? There's nothing like flashy about it. We did mention one wrestler that was very sort of bizarres and all the rest, and that was of course Gorgeous George. And we are going to have Gorgeous George on this series, and that he's something really fascinating to look at. But bar him, this was your kind of almost. This was what a wrestler would look like. I mean, if you come at anything else, you'd probably be going, "What the hell?" I love that little move there. I've got to say, I've never seen that before. That move they just done when they were kind of stretching into each other. But that was kind of cool.
It's like a
I don't know what you'd call that.
It's like a test of strength, but from like a sort of arm lock.
Little nip up there by Pat O'Connor. Again, you look at this and you're thinking this is going to have pure chain wrestling again, and this is what people loved about the last match. They loved the fact that they just worked, they kept on the arm for the entire time without relinquishing it unless the referee breaks the hold. But that's kind of what it was like back then. I mean, it was very much wrestling was the focal point. As I say, you really had to know it. So far, I'm impressed with both of them. I've got to say, they both look like they are very good at what they do. I mean, I've only been, this is the first time I've seen Pat O'Connor in person, so I've only heard about him. All I know is whoever did hold that belt back then, they'd have to be pretty bloody good, especially if you beat Lou Thesz. So this guy would have been respected enough to. Because back then you didn't win the belt unless all the promoters agreed. It was such a big honour to get that to happen. And many guys did challenge but never got that title. You've got to remember that as well. Cool. That actually looks like it's going to wrench his arm off.
Yeah, really wrinkle. Yeah.
Christ. See, the way he's applied that, just to me, that looks just totally realistic. If I didn't know better, that's such a good way of applying. I say this to a lot of. Hopefully, I know we do have listeners that are learning to be a wrestler and stuff like that. Like, honestly, go back and watch these videos, because I think you can get what's old now is going to be considered new. You've got to remember that, because these things, like you look at a lot of these moves and holds that they put on, you won't see it that much in the mainstream. So, if you want to stand out from the crowd and be different, which is what it's all about, I really encourage everybody to go back and watch some of this stuff, because you'll definitely learn one or two things that you haven't seen before and think, I can add that to my wrestling moveset. Some of this stuff. Now, Matt, on our last episode of Wrestling Arts, we saw Buddy Rogers. Was you impressed with Buddy Rogers? I can't remember if you.
I actually was, and I find these things interesting because when you look at people from these particular eras, you can see, where newer generations drew their inspiration from. Because I should say it around the other way, but I see a lot of Ric Flair in Buddy Rogers, or I should say, I see a lot of Buddy Rogers in Ric Flair.
Yeah.
And you know, I can't speak for Ric Flair saying that he took like anything from the guy, but I definitely would assume he looked at him and thought, you know, like this is a guy worth picking some things up from, like, and the way he moves in the ring, and even like now and then there's like occasional little strut that you see.
Yeah. He was the showman, definitely, of this sort of era. I mean, people liked that about him at the time for Buddy Rogers. Yeah. So far, I've got to say, the match, I've been very impressed with it. This, again, it's been, you know, very, very professional, very, like, you know, a good sort of pace to it all. You know, they do it right when you want it. I mean, I can imagine, I can't hear anything, but I can imagine that the crowd are getting sort of like a bit, and then they slow it down, then they give them a little bit more, then they slow it down. You know, it's just, it's such good psychology that they had for that crowd back then.
And I like the way that, like, it makes sense the way they wrestled back then. Like, he's really trying to rip that arm off, you know?
Yeah,
and he hasn't really relented on it.
Yeah. It's a huge shoulder tackle going in and then a forearm.
And then also, back then, look how effective one strike is. Right now, like, when you watch wrestling now, you can take 10 sort of shots to the head just to get that reaction.
Yeah, I think that's always been the case. I mean, I used to say things like that back in the day when, you know, you had so many chair shots, and you was like, crikey. Like, I think we've kind of come to a time where people expect so much now that they're not really that bothered about anything, because it's been just overused, everything. I mean, to the point where I've had this argument many a times on our original program, but the amount of finishers that we see during one match now is incredible. I mean, it's like it's not even like they save it for a pay-per-view anymore. It's like even on Raws or SmackDowns, it's incredible how many times they have to do it to get the crowd up, which is a shame, because a finisher was exactly what it was, a finisher. That was the end of the match. Nowadays, it's like takes 2-3 of them to get through, you know. It's like very seldom that that'll happen. I mean, when you look at these guys, when I looked at these guys standing there, Matt, and like opposite each other, I was like, nah, these guys won't be able to do that faster pace. I've been impressed with the pacing and the shape of these guys that are in, because, you know, they're not exactly being slow. I mean, you might look at all these holds, but even these holds, they look like they're stretching each other. You know, they don't look like they're just messing about, saving time. So everything here looks very, very genuine. God, I love that cell there where that, like, whatever it was, come out of his mouth. Look at his tooth just like bounced out. Like, whoa. A lot of using of the ropes in this one as well, I've noticed. God. You talk about strong style now, but even back then, you know, unbelievable. And so that would be the first fall. Now, don't forget, I should have probably pointed this out. The NWA World Heavyweight Title match was a 2 out of 3 pins, basically. So it was like that. I think Ring of Honor used to use that code, didn't they, for a long time? I don't know if they still do now with their world titles, but that was part of what they used to do at one time. So you get that, and then you had the. It looks like the guy's going to announce it just in case anyone missed it. He looks happy, doesn't he? Or nervous. Cool, it's like, hang on, I'll check it, just make sure that I get this right.
Yeah, it's like he was doing something else. He was like, oh, I wasn't paying attention. Who got the pin?
Which one? So, Buddy Rogers is 1 up. And again, this was for the NWA World Heavyweight title. And this was no small feat, ladies and gentlemen, because, like I say, I feel Pat O'Connor had probably had this belt now, like, for a good 3 years or so. What's this? Wrestler's sound off. Whoa. I wonder how interesting this is. Now, I hope you, the listeners, can you know, it's worth probably turning this up a little bit and seeing what they're all saying here. This must have been like the bit of the match of like what was going on, how did it happen. This would never happen today, because even when they go up to that bloody panel and they talk to Booker T and all the rest of it, it's like they never talk about the match. They never talk about the ending of it or how it all came about. It's always he's won or he's lost. You know, that's all you get. I love the way that guy.
These guys talking. I'm thinking, is that guy on the left actually involved? Or is he just trying to get his face on TV?
The guy on the right as well. Those old hats going in there. See, that's when you know where you are in the times of the 60s, the very early 60s there. Coming out. Whoa, there was a bit of rubbish just chucked to someone's head then. It's the NWO times.
Like, get on with the match.
Yeah, get on with it. No messing about in Chicago back then. But again, you've got to remember as well, and I have to overemphasise this, is that this was a time where people went to a wrestling show, Matt, and no one was saying it was fake back then. You know, nobody was saying it was a work. This was treated as a sport almost. So, you know, you didn't... Back then, the business was so secretive. It was so, like, you had to be in to know everything, and, you know, you had to be well trusted. In a lot of ways, Matt, it's kind of like... I look back at it and I'm kind of like... It's kind of sad to see how exposed everything has become, because there's no magic to it anymore, which is a shame. But that part will probably never come back, will it? Really, there's no way you could get it back to having people not knowing what's going on now. When the biggest company in the world pretty much says it's a work, you know. So internally they say it now. It's not even us from the outside saying it. It's such an open thing, and people will take good and bad from that. Some people will say, well, they had to say it sooner or later. Look how silly it got. But is it because it got so kind of silly that they had to admit it? Because if you was looking at this type of stuff, you probably... I'm not saying they would have got away with it in today's age, but I think just that kind of them not coming out and saying it kind of give it that nice sort of magician feel to it. You know, like you have to be in it to know really what it's all about and how does it all work. Like, you know, it's kind of a shame that we know the inner workings of the business now so much, but yeah, it certainly got exposed probably the back end of the 80s especially to everybody when it all started to come out. But here was a very golden time of, if you go to a wrestling show, you thought this was, you know, the real McCoy kind of thing. And certainly what's worth pointing out as well, Matt, and we had this actually an email, and they said about the last match, they were talking about the Lou Thesz Buddy Rogers match. They said there was no kids in the audience. This wasn't a thing for kids back then, was it? Yeah, there wasn't merchandising selling here, were they?
Yeah, definitely more adult entertainment. I don't suppose if you believed it was going to be as physical and as real as they were trying to make it seem, then you wouldn't really want to take your kid to see another man beat up another guy.
No. I mean, this was this was on the same path as boxing. I mean, it was considered the same. You know, wrestling and boxing was very, you know, the crowd attendances and everything else were virtually the same. So, you know, this was a completely different time. As we see Buddy Rogers now working, he's gone back on an arm here. But I have to say I've been impressed with Pat O'Connor as well. He seems like a more physical kind of wrestler, in the sense that he was doing the slams and all the, you know, the lifting of the match. Which you know, you look at him and you think, you know, that guy, there's no way he can do that. But I was quite impressed with him then, before the first fall.
And the way this match is going, what would you expect O'Connor to get the next fall? Would you see Buddy Rogers just like taking it 2-0?
You know, in today's, the way we've been taught today, and you know, in WWE terms, I would definitely expect Pat O'Connor to get the next fall. But back here, because of the way they present it, it wouldn't surprise me if actually Buddy Rogers got the next fall. You know, that wouldn't surprise me at all. Because the presentation, it wasn't all about the over dramatics here. Like, you know, it wasn't so much about all that. It was they were going very much on realism. God, that don't look too comfortable, does it?
Nasty. No.
But you know, a lot of people as well. They say, has the art of selling been lost in times? And you know, sometimes I watch matches today, and